Hello, dreamers. It's Indie Lab again. Last week, we were lucky to be interviewed by one of the biggest gaming press outlets in Vietnam about just the Shadow game. And I was really happy because they're a channel I watched often. They sent over some interesting questions, and one of them really stuck with me. Have you faced any challenges in developing strategy games? If so, what's the hardest part? And that got me thinking. I've worked on 2 deep strategy games, but I've never really written down my thoughts on what makes a good one. So, taking this opportunity, I want to try making a video analyzing what I've learned and sharing my personal view on what makes a good strategy game. Just like the question, what makes a good game? The question, what makes a good strategy game, has many answers. For me, the 3 most important factors in a good strategy game are depth, complexity, and variance. The first time I came across this idea was while watching a stream by Tim Ruswick, and it became a guiding principle for my game design. So first is depth. Depth here is often reflected in engaging gameplay, a lively world, character customization, skill, and many other factors. But the most important part is decision-making depth, the number of meaningful options a player has at any given moment. Let's take Wild Frost, for example. Right now, you have 5 cards. Each card represents a possible action, and you decide based on the board state. The ability to choose and make meaningful decisions is the core of every strategy game. Depth isn't just about options in combat, it also applies to choosing rewards, using skills, or even deciding which enemy to attack. For example, in Vampire Survivors, when leveling up, you get to choose 1 out of 3 rewards. That too is part of depth. However, these options must be meaningful to the player. If your character is at full health, but the game presents you with 3 healing options, then they are effectively useless. Similarly, if one option is significantly stronger than the others, it diminishes the value of alternative options, turning the strongest option into an obvious pick. And this is a common issue in games, often leading to complaints about certain mechanics being overpowered or imbalanced.
4700, 방어력 329, 마저 201인 챔피언이 저지불가 쉴드 병 넘기는 거 있고요. 에어본 있고 심지어 쿨타임은 1초밖에 안 되고 마나는 15 들고 W 심지어 변신하면 쿨 초기화에다가 패시브는 고정 피해가 들어가며 그 다음에 방마저를 올리면 올릴수록 스킬 가속이 생기고 스킬 가속이 생기고 스킬 속도가 빨라지고 그 다음에 공격력 개수가 있어가지고 W가
That's why depth is the first key element in making a good strategy game. The easiest way to increase the game's depth is to add complexity, which refers to the number of systems within the game. Adding more systems is the easiest way to increase the game's depth, but not the smartest way. Let's take StarCraft as an example. By simply adding gas as a resource, the game's depth increased significantly. I temporarily call this system the dual resource system. Minerals, they're mainly used to produce most basic units, buildings, and workers. The Vespene gas, they're mainly used to produce high-tech units and upgrades. So if the game had only minerals, players would just focus on harvesting and spamming units. But having 2 resources forces players to balance their economy and adjust their strategy accordingly. For example, with the notorious cannon rush strategy in StarCraft 2, Protoss players often maximize mineral harvesting early on to execute an aggressive photon cannon rush because these cannons don't require gas. This tactic is really effective early on if it causes significant damage to the enemy's economy. Even though each base has 60 mineral slots and 6 gas slots, players don't always fully staff their gas workers immediately. Adjusting just 1 or 2 workers can make a significant difference in strategy. For new players, this might not seem important, but for pro players, it defines build orders and shapes entire strategies. Taking gas early allows for faster take, useful for Blink Stalkers, Banshee Cloak, or Roach speed strategies. taking gas later and focus on minerals allows for more early zealots, marines, jerklings for better defense or early rushes. And there are many other examples just with this dual resource system. But if I go on too much, this video will turn into an analysis of StarCraft 2. So all of these are basically examples of how a single system increases depth dramatically. However, adding complexity isn't always beneficial. Sometimes it increases depth insignificantly while making the game harder to approach. For example, Cossacks has up to 6 different types of resources. Food, used to sustain the army. Wood, used for building houses and structures. Stone, used for constructing fortresses and castles. Iron and coal, required for firing guns and cannons. Gold, used to maintain the army. It is clear that iron and coal overlap too much and mainly function like an energy bar. Having so many resources doesn't necessarily make the game deeper than StarCraft, which only has 2 resources. Instead, it makes the game more complex and harder to understand for new players. At this point, you might think, but games with high complexity like Civilization and Heroes of Might and Magic are still hugely successful, right? Yes, that's true. As I mentioned earlier, increasing complexity usually helps depth grow, but they are also more complex and hard for new players to get into. High complexity used to be an advantage that made classic games successful, because at that time, the market had less competition and players were willing to spend time to learn. However, in today's highly competitive market, where players have less patience for your game, high complexity can easily become a barrier, making the game harder to approach. So, how can we increase complexity while keeping the game accessible? A practical solution is to use familiar systems and improve upon them rather than introducing entirely new mechanics. A recent example is Balatro. It's a game that is easy to understand and play. But imagine, if poker and deck-building roguelikes didn't exist before, this game would actually be quite complex and difficult to approach. For me, a good modern strategy game maximizes depth while keeping complexity moderate. If you're designing for casual players, reducing complexity is even more crucial. Many classic board games excel at this balance. Let's take 5 in a row as an example. It's an extremely minimalistic system, but on your turn, you have so many options, and that's why it's a highly deep strategy game. It's no surprise that indie games that leverage this concept well have been successful in recent years, such as Slay the Spire, Bad North, Into the Breach, and Balatro. Even just the Shadow game, which is my current project, also follows this philosophy. For those unfamiliar, it's a card game mixed with ritual mechanics. Initially, I added various systems that I believe would make the game deeper, such as allowing players to expand their town using relics or giving each pagan unit some unique abilities. Even I have already coded into the game, but after playtesting, I was willing to remove them and focus on depth optimization rather than blindly adding complexity. And the last one is variance. Simply put, variance refers to the degree of change in gameplay experience. These changes can come from new enemies, new behaviors, new mechanics, new rewards, and so on. Regardless of the genre, a game with low variance becomes predictable and quickly feels repetitive for players. This is especially true for strategy games, where players can easily find optimal strategies and repeatedly use them. This also explains why the roguelike genre has been so successful. Each playthrough introduces random challenges, forcing players to constantly adapt. This is why the roguelike genre has remained relevant and continues to thrive despite existing for a long time. Besides variance, there are many other factors also contribute to a great strategy game, such as fog of information, strategic layers, asymmetry and diversity, and risk and reward. But you know what? We need to spend time developing and finding a publisher for just the Shadow game too, so we'll grab up the video here. If you're interested in this topic, let me know, and I'll make more analysis videos. And what about you? What do you think makes a great strategy game? Let's discuss in the comment section. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to us. See you next week. Bye.